A recent study published by VOA confirms that most of Americans people know very little information about the Native Americans. And that is why there are so many misconceptions and misunderstandings about the Native Americans, about where they were coming from, and about the characteristics of the Native Americans itself. Thus, in this opportunity, my name is Shabrina Kiranamita, and I would like to present you my discussion about Native Americans. So later, in today's presentation, there will be 5 discussion agenda. The first one is the definition of Native Americans, the second one is the history of Native Americans, the third one is the belief of Native Americans, the fourth one is the characteristics of Native Americans, and the last one is about the traditions of the Native Americans. So now let's move to our first discussion, which is about the definition of Native Americans itself. Actually, the term Native Americans, also well known as the Indigenous Americans, American Indians, or sometimes also called as the College Tribe. Actually, all of these terms have the same meaning. So the meaning is the people who were first set them foot in the island of America or in the island of the United States. Most of the people believe that the person who found the island of United States of America was Christopher Columbus. Meanwhile, actually that history was wrong, because before Christopher Columbus, long time ago, there were already indigenous people who lived in the island of the United States of America, and those people called as Native Americans. So there are around until now there are around 574 federally recognized tribes living within the U.S., and half of which are associated with Indian reservations. So that is why actually the Native of Americans is the Indian tribe, and they called as the Native Americans because they already lived in the island of America long time ago. And even until now, there are over 5 million Native Americans lived in the United States. So the next one is about the timeline of the history of Native Americans. So actually there were no specific date of when the ancestors of Native Americans arrived in the island of America. However, most of the sources stated that over 20,000 years ago, the ancestor of living Native Americans arrived in the island of America. Long time after that, in 1492, Christopher Columbus set foot in the Americas. And from that moment, Christopher Columbus and the Europeans who arrived in around 16th century want to take over the island of United States of America, even though at that time they were already the ancestors of Native Americans who lived in that island. So in 1756, the 7 years war between British and French began, because all of them want to take over the island of America. The Indian people or the indigenous or Native Americans being colonized for so many years, they cannot get their own right even though they were the Native Americans. Therefore, after that, in 1968, finally, the Indian Civil Rights Act was signed into law by President Johnson. So all of the people of Native Americans especially can get the same rights, because there was already a law named the Indian Civil Rights Act. So the next one is about the belief of Native Americans. So actually, there are so many beliefs of Native Americans. There are so many beliefs, but one of the famous beliefs adhered by the Native Americans called as Wakantanka. So Wakantanka refers to the sacred or the divine. It usually translated as the great spirit or the great mystery, and most of the Native Americans adhere to this belief. So Wakantanka also considered as the animism and dynamism, in which the Native Americans adhere to the spirit. So they believe that every creature and object is Wakam, or holy or having aspects that are vacant, while the word Tanka means that correspond to the great or large. Even though there were so many beliefs in there by the Native Americans, still this is one of the most famous belief that most of the Native Americans adhere to this belief, which is called as Wakan Tanka. And the next one is the characteristics of Native Americans. So, not many people know that actually the Native Americans was not white people. Instead, they were the Indian people. Thus, there are some unique characteristics of the Native Americans. I will explain it one by one. The first one is about the language. So, the Native Americans, most of them speak in Navajo language. So actually, their mother tongue is not English but Navajo, because there are nearly 170,000 speakers that speaks in Navajo. And the second biggest language spoken by the Native Americans called as UP, with around 19,000 people who speak in UP. However, in today's era, most of the Native Americans and the Americans people talking in English, but actually their mother tongue is not English but Navajo and UP. The second one is the weapons of the Native Americans. So actually the Indian tribes or the Native Americans usually use bows, arrows, knives, and also clubs, spears as their weapons. However, some of them also carry tomahawks. That is the unique weapons of the Native Americans. Also, in the 16th century, they got guns from traders in Europe. So, before they got the guns and introduced into guns in 16th century, they used the traditional weapons as I explained before. For example, like bows, arrows, tomahawks, spears, and many others. The next one is about the physical. So there is a unique characteristic of the Indian tribe or the Native Americans. Usually, the Indian tribes or the Native Americans have the typical exotic brownish skin. They also have the black and sharp eyes and the prominent jawbone. The Native Americans or the Indian tribes also relatively have the wide face shape and clear face lines, which made them easily recognized because they are unique characteristics. And the next one is about the unique dwellings. So actually, the Native Americans have the unique dwellings which are divided into some types. The first one is the home for shepherds, the second one is the wigwam, the third one is the farmers group homes, and the last one is the grass house. Also, there is a unique accessories that is until now is still popular, and that accessories was coming from the Native Americans or the Indian tribes, and that accessories is a fur hat. So the fur hat was actually coming from the Native Americans or the Indian tribe. However, that fur hat also still popular until now, and many people use it because it is very unique. And the last one is about the traditions. So there are some unique traditions that is done by the Native Americans. The first one is the elongate the hair. So if you see the many people of Native Americans or Indian tribes, they will have a long hair, which is actually their traditions. The second one is body coloring, and the third one is face coloring. That is why when you search for the picture of Native Americans or Indian tribes, there will be so many pictures of them who use body and face coloring. So their face and their body will be very colorful because they paint it. And the last one is the head covers that I already explained before, which is the forehead accessories that they put in their head. And the most famous accessories or traditions by the Indian tribes that is still famous until now is the head covers. So that was all about my explanation about Native Americans. I hope that it can give you new knowledge and also insight. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.